Hi cellists, today let's talk about Schelomo by Ernest Bloch. Schelomo was called the wisest man that ever lived. It's the Hebrew name for Solomon, King Solomon. When you play it, think majestic, ancient, biblical. The big structure is in three parts that are separated by big tutis in the orchestra. According to Bloch, the orchestra is portraying the people around King Solomon and also his thoughts at times. But the protagonist is the cello, and this is the voice of Schelomo, King Solomon. Every time you hear this, King Solomon speaking. This piece is based on part of Ecclesiastics, where Solomon supposedly wrote Vanity of Vanities. In other words, everything is in vain. This earthly life is no good. And you can hear and this is something I believe Bloch wrote, the women of the harem trying to seduce Solomon away from his thoughts at rehearsal 1. So this is a dance. At the very beginning, I think of this long note as a blowing of a shofar, and if you've never heard a shofar before, I will try to find a link on YouTube and add here. But the idea is that you don't have to start with a vibrato right away. And there's this initial pa, the blowing, and then the release, and from there the vibrato grows. So I start without vibrato. And save your bow, it's a long note. And then you want to give your conductor a nod when you want them to come in. And this piece is very difficult in some ways because the pulse should be very clear. You are playing with orchestra, and yet there is freedom within the beats. And of course, there is a lot of freedom. You can take a lot of freedom when the orchestra is not playing or is sustaining a long note. And for that, I highly encourage you to look at the score and study the score. Sometimes it's a little easier to study the piano reduction because things are just written out, the main melody is written out clearly. So rehearsal 1, as I said, a dance. Pay attention to the dashes. They come on the 2nd and 4th beat. So this is not 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a 1, 2, 3, 4. Important to note, before the 9/8, 3rd bar of rehearsal 1, you can take a little time. Be sure you take Italian dictionary and translate all those words. For example, disinvolto senza accelerare. We all know what senza accelerare is, but disinvolto is breezy. And so I would use more air in the bow. Another suggestion is to, when you look for definitions for words, whether Italian or German, it's always best to look in a regular dictionary or online rather than a music dictionary, because then you get a fuller understanding of the word. When we arrive at the 3/4, which is the fourth bar after rehearsal 1. Be exact, look at your conductor if you can. Maybe they will look at you, but we are together with the harps there, and you can't be wild, you have to be quite clear. There are a few tricky spots, very tricky spots in this piece, where we have 5 against 2, we have 8 against 3. The way I work on those are just by getting them into my system by repetition. For example, after rehearsal 22, I would put the metronome on 3 with a little ding on the 1 of each 3/4 bars. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So if you've noticed, I've counted 2 on starting on the C. So 1, 2, and again 1, 2, 1, 2. I made a big hemiola of those 2 bars. And then 1 bar before 23 is back in 3/4. Those should be very, very clear to you because it's tricky to put it together with an orchestra. So just practice with a metronome. Practice with a metronome beating 3/4 as is printed, but count in your head maybe 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 on those 2 bars, 3 before rehearsal 23 and 2 before rehearsal 23. The quintuplet, I would put the metronome on a 2/4, so 1, 2, 1, 2, and practice separate bows until you get the rhythm exactly. So I would practice it in a loop. That's how I get quintuplets to be part of my DNA, is by just repetition. So 1, 2, 1, 2. Once you get that as part of your system, you can add the slur. Let's talk about expressive shifts and fingerings. This piece, as other pieces by Bloch, for example, from Jewish Life, requires fingerings that are more expressive rather than clear and clean. For example, as you see, I do 2, 3, and then 2, 2, 2 to create that slide. Right after rehearsal 3, this is the 4th bar after rehearsal 3. We have Expressive written in. And again 2, 2. If you want 3, 3, perhaps. That's a tricky place. My fingerings are 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 4, 1. So as you see, there is a pattern here. When we use a pattern, muscle memory works better, I think. So. And you can take time here. And the orchestra comes in rehearsal 4, and you have to be clear and give your conductor a nice nod there. Coming back to the colors and fingerings, right after rehearsal 44. Again, 3, 3 to create that expressive shift. That's the 5, 4 after rehearsal 4. Again, don't be shy. You can use slides all over the place. Think speaking, think human voice. In terms of learning the score, I put some orchestra cues in my cello part so that things are clear. One entrance that's tricky is at rehearsal 24. The only theme in this piece that is directly taken from nigunim, from melodies that were already written before, is the theme that we have at rehearsal 20. That really does sound like a shofar as well. The first time this comes in the oboe, a few bars earlier, and so this is ta 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 ta. This sounds very much like a shofar. I'm a little disorganized today. You'll forgive me. Again, coming back to the idea of putting cues in your score, one important place is also, if we look at rehearsal 8, 1, 2, 3. The fourth bar of rehearsal 8 is a 4/4 bar, and there is an upbeat of a G in the violins. It's important to know that they have the eighth before you come in. Otherwise, you might mistake it and think that they come in on the downbeat. So be aware of this. Rehearsal 7, we have strict rhythm in the strings. And some conductors will be okay accompanying you freely there, but be prepared to play it strictly in tempo. Another polyrhythm, we have the 3/4, 2 bars before rehearsal 29. We have to fit 8 notes in 3 beats, and this requires some metronome work. So if we start 1 bar before that, so 2, 3, 1. So this 3, 4. Again, put the metronome on 3/4 so that it dings a little louder every 3 beats, and practice separate bows first with a loop until you feel that 3/4, 3/4 against 8 in your system. Let's talk about structure. There are 3, as I said before, 3 big pieces to this work. The first section beginning to rehearsal 16. Rehearsal 16 starts the second section, and the third section starts at the andante moderato, which is after rehearsal, between rehearsal 34 and 35. And this last and third part of the piece is a dark. This piece is not optimistic so much. You can hear it. King Solomon, as if he's beating down his big stick and saying, you know, you're all bad. This ending is also a duet between the contrabassoon and us and Solomon, and the conductor will probably beat. So it is measured. You should know what's going on in the contrabassoon. It's very hard to hear sometimes on stage because they're way back there and we're at the front of the stage. So you might have to rely on your conductor. But here, this triplet goes against duplets in the contrabassoon. And so you should be exact. This piece ends on a pessimistic note. There is a sense of fatalism and despair. When you sit on stage, you are an actor. In this piece, it's very much obvious that we are actors, and you should feel majestic and act majestic. This is it for today. I hope I helped you, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.